The Pancho Villa Expedition, America's Pursuit of a Phantom in the Desert. Introduction. A Nation Provoked. The year was 1916, and the United States found itself on the brink of military intervention, not in the trenches of World War I, but in the rugged deserts and mountains of northern Mexico. For nearly 6 years, Mexico had been engulfed in a violent revolution, a shifting war of factions, betrayals, and ambitions. Among its most famous figures was Francisco Pancho Villa, a former bandit turned revolutionary, whose charisma and military prowess made him both a folk hero and a feared warlord. Once an ally of the United States, Villa had become a bitter enemy. The Wilson administration had supported him, but by 1915, American policy shifted in favor of his rival, Venustiano Carranza, recognizing him as Mexico's legitimate leader. Villa saw this as a betrayal. Determined to retaliate, he plotted a daring cross-border raid, one that would mark the first attack on U.S. soil by a foreign force since the War of 1812. March 9, 1916, the attack on Columbus, New Mexico. In the dead of night, under the cover of darkness, Pancho Villa and 500 of his men slipped across the border into the small town of Columbus, New Mexico. The town's 50 U.S. cavalrymen were caught off guard. The Villistas stormed the streets, firing rifles, looting businesses, and setting buildings ablaze. American civilians were dragged from their homes. The town's telegraph office, its only link to the outside world, was one of the first targets. The flames from burning houses lit up the desert sky, casting eerie shadows on the riders who galloped through the town. Yet the Americans fought back. The 13th Cavalry Regiment, though outnumbered, rallied under the command of Major Frank Tompkins. Armed with Springfield rifles and Colt machine guns, they fired from defensive positions, cutting down nearly 80 of Villa's men. The tide of battle quickly turned. Seeing his losses mount, Villa gave the order to retreat back into Mexico, leaving behind death and destruction. In just a few short hours, 18 Americans lay dead. The town was left in smoldering ruins. 80 Villistas had been killed, but Villa himself had escaped unharmed. America reacts. The call for retribution. News of the attack shocked the nation. For decades, the U.S. had dealt with border raids and banditry, but a full-scale assault on American soil was unprecedented. The headlines screamed for vengeance. Villa must pay. Mexico's bandit king strikes America. An invasion must be answered. President Woodrow Wilson, despite his focus on keeping America out of World War I, had no choice. He authorized a military expedition into Mexico, not as a full-scale invasion, but as a punitive campaign to track down and capture Pancho Villa. The mission would be led by one of the most capable soldiers in the U.S. Army, General John J. Blackjack Pershing. March 15, 1916. The pursuit begins. At dawn on March 15th, over 10,000 U.S. soldiers crossed the border into Mexico, marking the largest American military operation since the Civil War. It was a campaign unlike any before it. The first large-scale U.S. military use of airplanes. The first major use of motorized vehicles in warfare. The first high-tech search and destroy mission in U.S. history. The vast deserts of Chihuahua, however, would prove to be a greater enemy than Villa himself. The soldiers were ill-prepared for the brutal environment. The days were blistering hot, the nights freezing cold. Water was scarce, and supply lines stretched thin. Mexican villagers, caught between fear of Villa and distrust of the Americans, were reluctant to help. Despite these challenges, Pershing was determined. He divided his forces into smaller strike groups, spreading them across the region, hoping to trap Villa in a pincer movement. March 29, 1916. The Battle of Guerrero. After weeks of pursuit, Pershing's forces finally struck. On March 29, near the town of Guerrero, U.S. troops under Colonel George A. Dodd encountered a force of Villistas. The battle was fierce. American cavalry charged through the streets, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat. The Villistas fought back with machine guns and rifles, but the superior discipline of the U.S. soldiers won the day. The Americans killed dozens of Villa's men and scattered the rest. But Villa himself? Nowhere to be found. Rumors swirled. Some claimed he was gravely wounded, others that he had escaped into the mountains. Some even believed he was dead. But the truth was more elusive. The hunt stalls, a war of shadows. For months, the Americans continued their relentless pursuit. They raided villages, burned hideouts, and chased whispers of Villa's whereabouts. But the longer they remained in Mexico, the more the diplomatic situation deteriorated. Diplomatic crisis, the edge of war. At first, Venustiano Carranza, the Mexican president, had tolerated the American incursion. But as the months dragged on, he and his government began to view Pershing's presence as an invasion. Anti-American sentiment swelled. Mexican troops, loyal to Carranza, clashed with Pershing's forces in several skirmishes. On June 21, 1916, the most serious clash occurred at Carrizal. A Mexican garrison engaged U.S. cavalrymen, leading to a pitched battle that left 12 Americans dead and 23 captured. Back in Washington, war seemed inevitable. Some U.S. officials called for a full-scale invasion, but President Wilson, wary of the growing tensions in Europe, chose to seek a diplomatic resolution. By early 1917, negotiations between the two nations led to an uneasy agreement. The Punitive Expedition had failed to capture Villa, and the political cost of staying in Mexico was too high. On February 5, 1917, General Pershing received the order to withdraw his forces back into the United States. Aftermath: the fate of Pancho Villa. Villa lived to fight another day. Though weakened, he remained active in Mexico's ongoing conflicts. By 1920, he agreed to a truce with the Mexican government, retiring to a ranch in Chihuahua. But his story did not end peacefully. On July 20, 1923, he was ambushed and assassinated by unknown assailants. Some say it was Carranza's men. Others suspect the U.S. played a role. Legacy: a ghost in the desert. The Pancho Villa Expedition was one of America's greatest military frustrations. It demonstrated the limits of military power in guerrilla warfare, the rising tensions between the U.S. and Latin America, the new challenges of modern warfare in an unforgiving environment. Though Villa was never captured, his legend only grew stronger. Even today, his name echoes through history: a revolutionary, a bandit, a warrior, and a ghost in the desert. The withdrawal, an unfinished war. Introduction: the beginning of the end. By early 1917, the Pancho Villa Expedition, once launched with such urgency and national fervor, had reached an impasse. For nearly a year, General John J. Pershing and his 10,000-strong force had pursued Francisco Pancho Villa across the rugged mountains and arid deserts of northern Mexico. They had engaged in fierce skirmishes, raided Villista hideouts, and tested new military strategies and technologies. Yet, the primary objective, to capture or kill Villa, remained unfulfilled. Now, as the world tilted toward a much larger war in Europe, President Woodrow Wilson faced a stark choice. Continue the mission in Mexico at the risk of escalating tensions with the Carranza government. Withdraw the expedition and refocus military efforts on the looming entry into World War I. The decision was not an easy one. February 5, 1917. The long march home. On February 5, 1917, the official order was given. The Punitive Expedition would withdraw from Mexico. The withdrawal was not a triumphant return. Instead, it was a somber retreat, a recognition that despite months of effort, the United States had failed to capture its elusive target. Pershing's troops, once fiercely determined, now marched back through the desert, weary from the relentless pursuit of a ghost in the wilderness. They had killed hundreds of Villa's men in various battles, scattered his forces, leaving his army significantly weakened, tested new military tactics in an unfamiliar, hostile environment. But the one thing they had not done was capture Pancho Villa himself. For the United States, it was a war without victory. For Villa, however, it was both a defeat and a triumph. His forces had been devastated, his army reduced to a shadow of what it once was. Yet, his legend had only grown stronger, a revolutionary leader who had defied the mighty U.S. Army and survived. Why did the mission fail? Though the Pancho Villa Expedition demonstrated America's growing military capabilities, it also exposed key weaknesses in modern warfare, weaknesses that would haunt future U.S. military interventions in similar conflicts. 1. The challenges of guerrilla warfare. Villa's ability to evade capture was not just luck, it was a testament to his skills as a guerrilla fighter. Unlike traditional battles where two armies met on open fields, Villa's forces struck quickly and vanished into the wilderness, used mountainous terrain to their advantage, relied on local support to stay hidden and resupply. The U.S. Army was trained for conventional warfare, but Villa did not fight conventional battles. No matter how well Pershing's men tracked, raided, and pursued, Villa remained one step ahead, always disappearing into the desert like a phantom. This frustration would later be echoed in U.S. conflicts in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, where heavily armed forces struggled against nimble insurgents using guerrilla tactics. 2. Mexican political resistance. At the beginning of the expedition, President Venustiano Carranza had reluctantly tolerated the U.S. military presence. However, as the months passed, Mexican resentment grew. Many Mexicans viewed the American incursion as a violation of national sovereignty. Anti-American protests and riots erupted in major cities. Carranza's forces began to openly resist U.S. patrols. By June 1916, these tensions exploded into open conflict at Carrizal, where Mexican troops clashed with U.S. cavalrymen. 12 American soldiers were killed. 23 others were captured, straining diplomatic relations even further. With the threat of full-scale war between the U.S. and Mexico looming, Wilson had to reconsider his priorities. 3. The looming war in Europe. By early 1917, events in Europe had escalated dramatically. Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking American ships. The Zimmermann telegram was intercepted, revealing a German proposal to ally with Mexico against the U.S. With World War I on the horizon, the U.S. could not afford to remain entangled in Mexico. Wilson needed to prepare the military for a much larger war, and Pershing's forces were needed elsewhere. Thus, the expedition was called off, and the troops were reassigned to train for European battlefields. The fate of Pancho Villa. Although he evaded capture, Villa's military strength never fully recovered from the expedition. His forces remained scattered. His power was significantly weakened. Carranza's government continued to consolidate control over Mexico. Villa still attempted several more raids, but by 1920, the revolution had largely run its course. In a surprising turn, Villa surrendered to the Mexican government, agreeing to retire to a ranch in Chihuahua under government protection. But his enemies had long memories. On July 20th, 1923, while driving in his Dodge touring car, Villa was ambushed and gunned down by a group of assassins. To this day, his murder remains a mystery. Some believe it was Carranza's men, eliminating a threat. Others suspect the United States played a role, ensuring Villa could never rise again. But in death, Villa became larger than life, his legacy growing into myth and legend. The legacy of the Pancho Villa Expedition. The Pancho Villa Expedition was more than a failed mission, it was a turning point in U.S. military history. 1. The first modern U.S. military expedition. The campaign introduced key innovations that would define 20th century warfare. The first large-scale use of aircraft in combat. The first major use of motorized vehicles in military operations. New radio communication tactics for battlefield coordination. These advancements would be crucial in the coming world wars. 2. A lesson in guerrilla warfare. The U.S. learned hard lessons about fighting an elusive enemy on unfamiliar terrain. These lessons would resurface in later conflicts, from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan, where U.S. forces once again faced insurgents who used the land as their greatest weapon. 3. The impact on U.S. Mexico relations. The expedition left a lasting scar on relations between the United States and Mexico. It reinforced Mexican distrust of American intervention. It fueled nationalist movements within Mexico. It remained a reminder of foreign interference in Mexico's internal affairs. Conclusion: the war that wasn't quite a war. The Pancho Villa Expedition remains one of the most unique and complex episodes in American history. It was a campaign without victory, a war that was never declared, a pursuit that ended in frustration. But while Pershing soldiers left only dust in their wake, the legend of Pancho Villa endured. Even today, his name echoes in history, a symbol of rebellion, defiance, and the untamed spirit of revolution. The chase may have ended, but the myth of the man still rides on. If you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a part of our community. Here, you will find historical wars, inspiring stories, and unique content based on real events. If you want to see more engaging and fact-based stories, hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest videos instantly. Your support means the world to us. Leave a comment and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next. Raising hands fire, bell subscribe, share, and help us bring these incredible stories to the world.